For a while I wanted to do a video, and actually a series of videos about the theory of evolution. And this series of videos is predicated upon the fact that the theory of evolution is universally taught not just in Gentile schools, but in Jewish schools, particularly modern Orthodox schools. And here's the problem. The theory of evolution is very problematic from a scientific perspective. And anytime there is a dubious scientific theory, proper education would require that both sides of the theory be taught, meaning the reasons those who believe in the theory believe in it is taught, and the reasons, rather in plural, the reasons those who dispute the theory should also be taught. In the case of the theory of evolution, it's taught as if although it is axiomatic and an absolute truth, and there's no question about it. At the scientific level, the theory of evolution is taught as if although it is completely proven. Nothing can be further from the truth. And in that sense, what's happening at the educational level to children and to adults is dubious, because as I will show in these classes, the theory of evolution actually is highly problematic. So what I want to show is those scientifically problematic aspects of the theory of evolution. Before proceeding, I just want to say one disclaimer, and it is as follows. I don't find the theory of evolution to be in discord with the idea of there being a creator. We believe, of course, that the ha'olam nivra yesh me'ayin. We also believe that the creator, God, governs the world. And we also know that God uses certain scientific principles to guide the world. I don't have a problem with science. In fact, I study science. I love science. I think it's fascinating, and I think the more science you study, the deeper your knowledge of the Creator is, because these are the rules that God is using to govern the world. In the case of the theory of evolution, the problem is that the theory has been used as a way to raise doubts as to whether there is a Creator. Again, I disagree with that. I don't think that theory of evolution is in discord with the Bible, but it has been used in a discordant fashion. It has been used as a way to try to displace knowledge of God, and it's been very successful, even though the theory of evolution can just be viewed from a Jewish perspective as a set of scientific rules through which God brings about certain life forms, and that would in no way discourage any adherent to Judaism, any believer in Judaism, any believer in the Jewish Bible. The theory of evolution should not discourage or weaken the biblical view of things. But the fact is that it does. That itself is dubious. The fact that the theory of evolution is presented as something that is an alternative to creationism, that itself is dubious and actually is a misrepresentation. And because of that, I think it would be appropriate to show how the theory of evolution itself is just non-scientific. It's non-scientific because it doesn't explain anything. And to do this, I would need to have a series of classes, not one class and not two classes. This is my first class on the subject. I don't know when I would have an opportunity to give the second class, but let's start with the following idea. Information, data. In the 1950s, Watson and Crick, they discovered the chemical structure of the genetic code, DNA. DNA molecules contain information. They contain data. And now we understand that living things, biological entities, are actually machines. And these machines exist based upon the digital information contained in the DNA molecules. The DNA molecules are based on a 4-character chemical code, and the 4-character chemical code is embedded in a double helix, and it's an incredibly complex molecule. It's an incredibly complex system of information. And what I want to ask is as follows. Are there any cases where information or data just appears ab initio, out of nothing? Does that happen at all? I'm not aware of it. And the reason I'm not aware of it, and I've studied the subject, is because it doesn't happen. There is no case where data, information just appears, unless there is a mind that is generating the information or organizing the data. Okay, so you have this genetic code, you have the DNA molecules. The DNA molecules contain information and data. That was already discovered, as I said, in the 1950s. But beyond that, beyond the DNA molecule, beyond the actual data and information which is necessary for every life form, there's something else. And the question is, how do you access the information? Right? So you can have, for example, information on a hard drive of a computer. The computer has to have the ability to access information. And once information is accessed, there's another question. How do you express the information? Right? Because it's not just enough to be able to access information, it has to be expressed at the practical level to do things, right? So in the case of molecular biology, the information on the DNA strands is accessed through RNA molecules, which is another very sophisticated system used to access the information contained in the DNA molecules. And then the question is, how do you express the information now contained in the RNA molecules so that you can produce proteins? So you have this incredible system which not only contains information, but also has the ability to access information, and also has the ability to express information. That's incredible. Now, it's more than that. In human life forms, the information is a specified type of information. And by specified type of information, I mean that, for example, when you write a poem, or when you write any literary work with language, you put words in a particular order. For the poem to work, the information has to be specified. So, to be or not to be, that is a question. Not be to question that. Right. I didn't say all the words, right? But I think you get the idea that information, specified information, has to be in a particular sequence. Otherwise, it doesn't work. What's incredible and what's a mystery is that the information contained in these double helix molecules called DNA are specified information. And again, the question is as follows. Is there a single case in the world, what people call nature? Is there a single case in the world where a chemical process leads to specified information? There isn't. So the question now becomes, well, where does the DNA molecule come from? Because it not only contains information, but it contains specified information, right? Now, the theory of evolution and the idea of natural selection through the process of natural selection as a result of mutations, or rather there are mutations and then there's natural selection from the mutations. Okay, let's assume that works. Let's assume that indeed organisms develop and organisms change through the random process of mutations and natural selection. Let's assume that's the case. It's not the case. It's it's scientifically incorrect, and we will discuss that further down. But the question is, where did this original DNA mechanism come from? Now, I want to say two things. There's a pasuk in Mishle that says, Adonai b'chokhmah yasad ares. God put wisdom in the world. So we have an explanation. We say that this wisdom, this information, this data comes from God. But the scientific position that it's just random, that there was no guiding hand, would be a credible position if there were other cases where information and data came about by some natural processes. But there are no other cases where this happens. But they keep saying, oh, but hold on. But yeah, we see that there's a process of natural selection. We see that there's mutations and natural selection of mutations. That only explains, potentially, and it doesn't really explain it, but that would only explain things post-creation of the DNA, meaning once you have this DNA system, and once you have all the systems in place to access the information, to process the information, then you can posit a system of natural selection. But the question is, where did the original system come from? And that's something for which there is no answer. And the great Rabbi Eliyahu ben Amozeg, and my father wrote an article about this, he asks that very question in his commentary to the Perashat Beshalach Bechama Shemesh on the Man. And he asks that very question. It's not my question, it's a question that Rabbi Eliyahu ben Amozeg asked. What brought up, even though he didn't know about the genetic code, but the question is, what brought about the system through which you can have natural selection, right? And that's a question for which there is no scientific answer. There is the answer of Adonai b'chokhmah yasad ares, but there is no scientific answer. Now, I want to bring just one case to show you how scientists, it's not science, that's deceptive, it's scientists that are deceptive, how scientists, they obfuscate the matter. So you have many, many textbooks in biology, and we've all read these textbooks. They talk about the finches in the Galapagos Islands. And we've all seen the pictures in the biology textbooks with the beaks of the finches, which have different shapes and different sizes. And always it's been, oh, well, this is a proof for evolution. And again, this is a quote-unquote proof for evolution, assuming you have the mechanism of the DNA molecule which allows for natural selection. Doesn't answer the question, doesn't even pretend to answer the question of, well, where did the DNA molecule system come from, right? But okay, but let's just go with the flow, so to speak. And they also brought the case of the moths in England, right? So they had some moths which were darker, they had some moths which were lighter, and this is all in response to various environmental or industrial factors that affected the moths, and that here we have supposedly, evidence of evolution. But here's the thing: when you have a pre-existing gene pool, it's true that within the pre-existing gene pool, there will be a selection of those genes which are more beneficial or have a higher survival rate. That would be the word I'm looking for in any particular given situation. It's not that new genes were created. It's not that there was only a gene for a short beak, and there's a gene through a mutation which created a long beak. No, that's incorrect. That's not the way this works. But rather, there is a pre-existing genetic pool, and within the pre-existing genetic pool, there is a pre-existing parameter for what a beak may look like. And given changes in the environment, particular genes from the pre-existing pool will be selected over other genes. That's not evolution, right? Unless you define evolution to mean any trivial cyclical change right? So you can also say that, one day it's sunny and one day it's cloudy and one day it's snowy and one day it's rainy. All that proves that there's an evolution in the Earth's atmosphere. Well, if you consider that to be an evolution, or you just consider that to be a cyclical change, right? There's natural changes within the atmosphere, and there's these different manifestations of those changes take place. So let's distinguish between microevolutionary changes, which are not really evolution, but rather a selection within a pre-existing gene pool, right? And macroevolutionary changes. And here's the point. There was absolutely zero evidence that microevolutionary changes over the course of enough time can lead to macroevolutionary changes. That's just not correct. There was no scientific evidence of that at all. Right? So while a long beak can turn into a short beak, while a dark moth can turn into a light moth, all true, a long beak cannot turn into the fin of a fish. And the fin of a fish cannot turn into the tail of a monkey. That's incorrect. So you see, they're very deceptive. They say, oh, look, these changes, and if you keep adding changes over the course of time, so by that logic, I can say that the atmosphere has, we have these cyclical changes, and there's snow, and then, over the course of time, instead of having snowstorms, you will have storms which produce gold, and it will be raining gold, and then over the course of time, you will have the sunshine, and the sunshine will be letting out lemon drops and gumdrops. Well, why not? I mean, these are all cyclical these are all micro changes that if you build up, eventually I can show you how it can turn into gold or it can turn into lemon drops and gumdrops. But that's childish. I mean, that's the stuff of Barney the dinosaur. It's not the stuff of actual deep thinkers. People who think deeply about this understand the distinction between a microevolutionary change, which is predicated upon a pre-existing gene pool, which we are aware of, and a macroevolutionary change, which would require a completely set of genes and a completely different set of information, a completely set of data. Where did the different information come from? So this is important to understand. And what I want to do over the course of these classes is to really drive home the unscientific nature of the theory of evolution. And now the question becomes, well, why are we teaching this to our children? And we understand that in Gentile schools they do this, fair enough. But if as a scientific matter the theory of evolution is unscientific, why as Jewish educators is it still taught in Jewish schools? Or perhaps I can ask a better question. Why not teach both sides of the story? Because if the answer is, well, we have to teach it to our children because they have to take biology regions and they need to know, okay, fair enough. So why not teach the other positions, the positions that show how ludicrous the theory of evolution is from a scientific perspective, right? So again, I want to summarize what I said in this class. I'm not dealing with the theory of evolution, although I did a little on a post-existence of a genetic code basis. After you have a genetic code, then you can discuss, at least you can say it, that there are mutations and natural selection. Okay, we'll deal with that perhaps in a future class. We will. But the question is, where did this information come from? Who put it together? You have these genetic DNA molecules, which are an incredible amount of information. This information contains the blueprints for organisms, and they're incredibly complex. Huge amount of information. Supposedly we're supposed to accept that this specified information, which requires a certain order, just came about, right? Just came about, even though there are no other cases in the natural world where specified information just comes about. We're supposed to accept that. And then we're supposed to accept that there are the cell has developed machines that can access the information, and the cells have developed other machines which can express the information. That is not scientific. There is no, even the theory of evolution, neo-Darwinism, molecular evolution, has no explanation for where those systems came from.